Everyone to the ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee for ICSS Sunday morning sessions. We're based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, USA. Our weekly programs are online via Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can also sign up at our website, icssmarks.org, to receive weekly email announcements for our Sunday sessions. We started doing these programs in Oakland live in 2006. You can view videos of past presentations, send us a message using our contact form, or make a donation to support our programs on our website, again at icssmarks.org. Okay, so let's get started. Violent demonstrations rocked Iran in recent weeks, prompting Donald Trump to promise that, quote, help is on the way as a U.S. Navy carrier strike group sailed to the Middle East, threatening an attack on Iran. According to the mainstream media and politicians, Iran is a regime in crisis that is murdering its citizens, uh, uh, and the Navy carrier is on its way to put murdering its citizens to put an end to mass democratic uprising. While Trump is making threats, the Democratic Party leadership is criticizing him for not reaching out to build bipartisan support for a military strike against Iran. What's going on in Iran? Who is in the streets? What are they doing and why? What role do outside organizations such as Mossad, MI6, and the CIA play in the protests? How are the protests related to the threat of a military attack on Iran by the United States and Israel? We're pleased to have as our speaker today investigative journalist Kit Klarenberg. Kit is one of the finest anti-imperialist journalists working today. For his efforts, the British government has basically forced him into exile, where rather than backing down, he regularly publishes outstanding pieces on the criminal modus operandi of Anglo-American imperialism. Kit writes regularly for the Gray Zone and Mint Press News. He is also the co-host of Decline and Fall, a weekly video stream on YouTube and Rumble, co-hosted with Alexander McKay. His work can be found on his website, Global Delinquents, at http www.kitklarenberg.com. That's kitklarenberg.com. And I urge you to check it out and support him in his work. Welcome back, Kit, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. We're really happy to have you back.
My absolute pleasure.
Go ahead and start.
Okay, sure. I thought you were going to give me an introductory question or something, but I suppose you've already kind of laid out the terms of engagement. Yeah. So, in the past few days, we have seen a really quite extraordinary, a kind of the beginning and immediate instant extinguishment of an attempted war against Iran. A kind of a repeat of the 12-day long catastrophe that Tel Aviv and Washington leveled at Tehran back in June 2025. It seems very clear that the Trump administration was on the verge of quote unquote coming to the rescue of all of these activists in the streets who speak suspiciously perfect English and seem very keen that their country is bombed. But yeah, I mean, the one of the reasons that there isn't a particularly clear information emanating from Iran is that the Iranians did something very kind of adroit, which was they very quickly moved to shut down a Starlink. This is the internet communication system ruled over by Lord Elon Musk. They in advance of these protests, activists funded by the State Department smuggled in Starlink devices to Tehran in order to facilitate this protest. The Iranians cottoned onto this. They tied down and confused Starlink devices using kind of GPS masking and all sorts of other digital tricks and methods. And so there was a kind of blackout on information emanating from Iran. This meant that there wasn't, despite the lurid claims of tens of thousands of people being killed emanating from National Endowment for Democracy funded organizations, this meant there wasn't this kind of cavalcade of atrocity propaganda emanating from Iran, and that there were some very embarrassing, very obvious fake, AI created or even clips from films were being touted as scenes from downtown Tehran. And it seems quite, yes, it seems that on the 14th, between the 14th and 15th, Trump was on the verge of launching another military intervention against Iran. There was, he openly said as much. And there was the movement of US air and naval assets towards the region. Netanyahu was in Greece, which is where he usually goes when Israel is about to launch yet another legal war of aggression against countries within the West Asian region. So the stage was very much set for another intervention, but at the very last minute, the US and the Israelis seem to have pulled back. Now, it's quite clear there was a lot of chaos going down on the streets of major Iranian cities. According to no less than Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director, who boasted about how we lied, we cheated, we stole, and has received vast sums from NEK, which is this very bizarre cult within Iran that claims to be communist, but is fully signed up to the government's destruction, the revolutionary government's destruction, sided with Iraq during the Iraq-Iran war during the 1980s, and has carried out mass casualty bombings and other militant strikes, killing civilians within Iran. That he openly stated that he wished the best for Iranian protesters who walk hand in hand and side by side with Mossad operatives. So, I mean, we can kind of get a rough idea of like who was causing the violence and what their ultimate objectives were and who they were receiving funding and direction and ammunition from. Quite literally, there have been reports in the mainstream media that there were snipers on roofs shooting protesters. This is a very common color revolution phenomenon dating back to at least the 1991 events in Lithuania that led to that effectively led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, where a large number of supposedly innocent, defenseless, peaceful protesters were killed by the Red Army. But there are very ample indications, and I have an investigation coming on this, that the shooters were themselves part of the anti-communist resistance, and they deliberately wanted bloodshed in order to obtain independence from Moscow. We saw this in Maidan very infamously. There was the massacre of Maidan protesters, anti-government protesters that made the government's downfall a fait accompli. There's an enormous amount of evidence that has emerged since that this was an inside job and a false flag pulled off by neo-Nazi elements within the country. Ivan Kachanovsky, a Ukrainian-born Canadian academic who's done a lot of work on has done a lot of work on this. His books are open access. I urge you to read them. He has had his property stolen in Ukraine by state order and has been effectively branded persona non grata in the country of his birth for daring to expose these inconvenient truths. In the initial stages of the Syrian quote unquote revolution, which was yet another Western-backed dirty war slash coup d'état. In 2011, there were snipers picking off protesters from roofs. We saw this in 2002 in Venezuela, which in the openly acknowledged CIA-sponsored coup to remove Hugo Chavez, which did for I believe 48 hours, but he was returned to power in the end. So I mean, it's quite clear just from open sources, that there was this kind of very familiar, for want of a better word, effort to get rid of, or at least kind of cause trouble for the Iranian government in advance of a saturation bombing campaign, and that the alleged death toll was going to be used as justification for intervention. Now, I think that there are a variety of reasons that they pulled back. Now, in July, in last July, in the wake of the 12-day war, there was a report published by the Tel Aviv-based Institute for National Security Studies, which is this think tank that's enormously influential on Israeli defense and security policy. And it effectively laid out why the 12-day war had failed to produce regime change, but still concluded that regime change in Iran should be Israel's end goal. And it set out ways to achieve this, and it's quite clear that lessons were learned. So, for instance, this report notes that there were several actions during the 12-day war which were intended to undermine the government's foundations and ignite mass public protests. But they were actually counterproductive because either the optics of these bombings were extremely bad and actually harmed Israel's crusade, but also the mere fact that there was a saturation bombing campaign going on at the time meant that protesters were, even if they were so inclined, were not going to go into the streets because there was just mass chaos and destruction. So it seems that the lesson learned from that was, well, okay, we'll get the people out in the streets first before the jets are in the air. But also, I think even more importantly is the fact that perhaps Trump and Netanyahu were victims of their own propaganda, because there were these all of these very lurid claims about the size of protesters in the streets of Iran and the number of people killed. That they may have been may have at the very last minute realized, well, actually there's not the public momentum for the government's removal, and in fact actually this is going to be counterproductive. That aforementioned Institute for National Security Studies report specifically noted that one of the main upshots of the 12-day war was creating a notable degree, quote unquote, of rallying around the flag by average Iranians who didn't want their country bombed, let alone meddled and ground into nothingness by foreign powers. And this kind of national unity has endured ever since. And younger generations of Iranians who didn't grow up during the Iranian Revolution or the subsequent Iran-Iraq War, they were given a kind of blunt force lesson in how the West and its proxy or proxies in the region have it in for the Islamic Republic and are willing to destroy it by force, which has given a significant number of people in Iran who might have hitherto not been well disposed to the government, something to fight for and something to rally around. But also as well, there is a very, very interesting report that got zero mainstream pickup whatsoever, such as the way of these things, from 2024, that was published by JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, which is a very powerful and shadowy Zionist lobby organization. It's responsible for pushing the training of US police forces by Israeli occupation forces, amongst other cheery things. Now, this report was called US Bases in the Middle East Overcoming the Tyranny of Geography. And it laid out, it was written, I might add, it was written by CENTCOM's former commander, Frank McKenzie, who oversaw the absolutely catastrophic retreat from Afghanistan in 2021. But this report makes the point that the US basing in West Asia means that most US bases or US affiliated bases that are effectively run by Israel or Saudi Arabia, say, they are mere minutes away from Iran, if Iran was to attack them with hypersonic or ballistic missiles, neither of which can be countered by the US or Israel. So that means that, like, within minutes of a major war breaking out against Iran, led by the US and Israel, most US bases in the Middle East will be, smoldering wreckages, and the various, fighter jets and other military assets that are sited there will be kaput. Very, very, very promptly. And I mean, Jinsa's remedy for this was simply to for the US to set up a military base in Israel itself, which I think would be extremely controversial, although it's certainly not outside the realms of plausibility, under the current US administration, which gives every appearance of just effectively having all of its decisions made for it in Tel Aviv, or indeed, during Netanyahu's seemingly weekly visits to Washington D.C. But yeah, effectively, this report warned that there would be a lot of adverse consequences in the event of a war with Iran, there has been no discernible move by the US or Israel in response to this report to address any of its issues, because I don't think that they're in a position to do so. Now, I might add that JINSA, in the wake of the 12-day war, published a separate report where they calculated that all of the missile interceptors and other kind of air defense that Israel had expended failing to repel Iranian strikes on Tel Aviv and Haifa and other major cities within the Zionist entity, will take up to 8 years for the US to replenish, because they don't have the resources or the industrial base to build these things with any speed, or economy. So, I mean, again, we've not really seen any indication that the US has undertaken measures to address this at all. The US remains embroiled in the Ukraine proxy war, which is, I mean, even though US aid has been drastically reduced and is now effectively been transferred to, Europe is now footing the bill for whatever the US can scrounge to send to the Ukrainians. They don't have any means of replenishing this at any pace or scale at all. And it's a real problem that they have no answer to, because years of outsourcing and offshoring have emaciated American industry to the point of no return. It's going to take decades, if at all, and an enormous investment in not only in money, but time and energy and people, and trying to regain the skills that have been lost from outsourcing and offshoring, for the US to be in a position to to regain a kind of fraction of its former industrial might. It's just been hollowed out to such an extent. So I think those were major deterrents to going ahead with this. Evidently the attempted revolution on the ground wasn't going as swimmingly as they hoped. The conditions weren't right. I don't think the risk of this has gone anywhere, though. I think that Israel is just biding its time before it gets another window of opportunity to target Tehran, in the hope that they'll finally crush the Islamic Republic, which, I mean, seems extremely unlikely, based on the present environment, because the public will within Iran for external intervention of any kind, let alone by countries that are possessed of a avowedly visceral aversion to their existence, is not going to be welcomed. So you've already lost on the hearts and minds front, and it would be extremely costly with all sorts of unwanted and potentially unforeseen consequences for the US empire. So they chickened out basically. But as I say, I don't. I mean, Netanyahu is a lunatic who is completely off leash at this point and thinks that he can do whatever he wants because he, by and large, can. And yeah, Iran remains a redoubtable foe, an adversary within the region, which is sponsoring and assisting anti-imperialist, armed factions in Iraq, and elsewhere in West Asia. They are a major irritant to Anglo-American and Israeli designs, within the region. So they have to be gotten rid of. But the how is a very tricky question.
Okay. Just a couple of quick questions, and maybe we can
Hmm.
open this up for discussion. Can you comment on the early stages of the demonstrations, what prompted them, and related to this, those who are casting what's going on as, a democratic uprising by repressive regime, those in the mainstream and also even some on the left. But what about the early stages? How did it evolve?
Well, I mean, this remains quite opaque. There wasn't a trigger, as has been the case in several previous the several previous kind of uprisings or upsurges of unrest locally. Like that seems to have been rather lacking, and it's not entirely clear what the trigger was. I mean, we can contrast this with the women's life freedom movement, which it kind of erupted at the end of 2022, and was that I mean that was in response to sorry, that was in the response to the alleged, killing of a woman who refused to wear a hijab by local security forces. It seems pretty clear this is not what happened, but that was the spark. And Yeah, I might add that it seemed to erupt from nowhere, and as I say, very quickly Iran moved to shut down communication within the country, and which strongly suggests that they saw this coming and had been preparing for it. But yeah, it remains very murky, and I mean, we've had the rather perverse spectacle of Drop Site, which is this successor to The Intercept, interviewing an alleged anti-government protester who's pixelated. I mean, the likelihood that they're on Mossad's payroll is probably quite high. But yeah, the real reason for this doesn't seem to. It seems very unclear. Maybe the Israelis, or the Americans or the British saw what they thought was an opportunity to get this going. And I don't necessarily think it's a coincidence that this follows hot on the heels of the US's abduction of Maduro from Venezuela, because I mean Trump was openly on a Hollywood speedballer high as a result, and claiming himself the acting president of Venezuela and saying that we're going to be taking over the country and that we're going to have US oil majors are going to take over Venezuela's oil industry, and then this all kind of dissolved into nothing. And I mean, the case against Maduro has fallen apart, pretty rapidly, to the extent that they now admit that he wasn't involved in drug dealing, he wasn't involved in drug trafficking, and the alleged drug cartel he led doesn't exist. And that's within a few days of legal proceedings being ongoing. So I think maybe emboldened by this success, or perceived success with Maduro, they decided to have another shot at toppling Iran. I mean, this is. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of your viewers this, but I mean, this has been Israel's overarching objective for decades. For a very long time, they have seen Iran as the key irritant to their objectives in the region. Now, it must be remembered that under the Shah of Iran, the Shah, collaborated both overtly and covertly with the Israelis. He handed them intelligence. He sold them weapons. He was, he was not formally stated, but certainly fully paid up kind of supporter of Israel. So the loss of Iran, given its regional and given its vast regional influence, culturally, politically, militarily, was like a severe blow. And again, it must be remembered that the response of Israel's response to the Iranian Revolution was to immediately to attack Lebanon, subject it to decades of occupation, target Syria, target Iraq, because they were trying to cause as much chaos as they possibly could and as many problems for the newly minted Islamic Republic as possible. But the Iranians have endured. Like I say, I think that they're closer together than ever before, at least within a lifetime. They have the military capabilities not to take out Israel, or completely vanquish the Americans from West Asia, but if they are challenged and they are threatened and they are subject to attacks, then they will respond. And as the 12-day war, the 12-day war started off with Benjamin Netanyahu boasting about how this was the end of the mullahs in Tehran, and that 80% of the public was on their side, and etc. And there was a lot of social media chatter courtesy of IDF cyber warfare operations, that the Shah of Iran was going to return and lead his people anew, and etc. And then within days they were in serious trouble, and their cities were getting battered, their military sites were getting battered, and after that coup de grace, which the US bombastically claimed it had inflicted on Iranian nuclear sites, the US and Israel were both forced to admit that actually we didn't really do any damage at all. Our various targets are basically unscathed. And the Israel also sought to completely take out the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They sought to cripple Iran militarily. They failed on every score. The fact that they so brazenly went for this without any pretext whatsoever, it was their justification for this was a very old IAEA report, which was avowedly out of date, and not endorsed by the agency today, suggesting that Iran could have nuclear capabilities. The Iranians are, they are, ever vigilant, and ever ready to respond. Which again might have served as a quite potent deterrent to further action.
Related to this, what do you sense is the military preparedness of Iran this time around compared to June when they launched their attack? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, well, it must be admitted that, and I think that there are friends of mine in Iran who, including some people who are quite critical of the government. They think that the government's not doing enough, in the face of a 21st Holocaust in Gaza, etc. They were caught heavily off guard by the by the initial kind of wave of attacks, which included in country Mossad sleeper cells carrying out sabotage missions, and flying drones that had been smuggled into Iran, into missile launch bases. And then there was that wave of assassinations of nuclear scientists and IRGC commanders and their families. And I think that that really did it shook the republic to its core, and I think it caught everybody off guard. But a point to make there is that, like, yes, that those in country intelligence that was relied upon to carry out those strikes, and that in-country network that was necessary to execute it, that's been wiped out now. So yes, while there does seem to be, still a ragtag bunch of people who are smuggling in Starlink machines and maybe like causing trouble, they have nothing like the clout that they previously did. And I think that the Iran has gotten a lot better at hiding now its various military assets. But just more generally as well, there's I think that another aspect to bear in mind is that here is that the fall of Syria. Many saw that as the end of the resistance, as led by Iran, because it severed the land bridge from Iran to Lebanon, and therefore cut the IRGC off from Hezbollah. But at the same time, like the Iranians have continued to not only assist the Ansar Allah in Yemen, and equip them with further military capability and hardware. They've also now actually kind of gotten their act together on forming a formal kind of military agreement with Russia and China. And that will mean training. That will mean provision of various weapon systems, etc. So I think that they are and just because they now know that the Israelis will leap at any opportunity whatsoever to try and finish the job that they spectacularly failed to do in June in June 2020. June last year. Again, that aforementioned INSS report, it states that toppling the Islamic Republic depends mainly on factors beyond Israel's control and on a catalyst whose prediction is elusive and may never materialize. So I'm sure that Israel will continue to try and start stoking protests and stoking unrest in the hope that it will provide a beachhead for intervention, quote unquote. But yeah, I mean, it's important to bear in mind like how quickly the Iran shut down like the entire country's communications network. Like you couldn't after the initial clashes, where I might add that you saw protesters murdering unarmed police officers amongst other kind of grisly sights, which will not have endeared them to the mass of Iranian citizens. That they very quickly went for a blackout. And that blackout means that, well, there's no information coming out. So yeah, as I mentioned, you don't have your propaganda to justify your criminal military assault on. But also it makes the sleeper cells within the country like it's almost impossible for them to communicate properly. So they can't coordinate. They seem to be in a much greater state of vigilance than before. And like I mentioned, that the usually there has been a trigger for protests in Iran, and I think that I mentioned the Women's Life Freedom Movement. One of the bitter ironies of that was it got saturation media coverage, and there were a lot of NED assets who were promoting this breathlessly, and then yes, the Shah's son, who claims to be the successor to Iran's non-existent throne, claimed to be, kind of leading the protests, etc. And this immediately led all Iranians within the country to jettison the effort entirely, because they didn't want to be associated with these people. It's like, and I might add that, yeah, that Israel has invested, vast sums and enormous energy and time in trying to falsely promote Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, as Iran's leader in waiting. This has had no discernible impact on public opinion whatsoever. He's not supported by any Iranians within the country. Even members of the Iranian diaspora see him as like rather unsavory because he's surrounded by all these like completely deranged ultra nationalist figures who openly talk about like torturing and executing their political enemies and like seizing power via a bloody palace coup. And so the instant that the Shah said, "Oh well, yeah, I'm at the forefront of this," Iranians just gave up on it because they didn't want to be like associated with such an unsavory person. So yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't think the threat's gone anywhere. But I do think that the pulling back is highly significant, and I think if Trump was quite as insane as he is widely perceived, and quite understandably, I mean he does seem genuinely demented, on not infrequent occasions. At the same time, like the fact that he didn't go for it this time, I think that strongly suggests that there are still people within the U.S. power structure who haven't completely lost their marbles and do realize that this wouldn't be a cakewalk, as it were. In airstrikes in themselves would have there would be a significant response and retaliation from Iran to that. I mean, let alone like boots on the ground. I mean, I don't think that America really has the military capacity to put boots on the ground in any significant number anywhere in the world, let alone a vast country like Iran with a population of 80 million people. Although I do notice that the Wall Street Journal has since this kind of failed attempt to foment a new war, they've published an op-ed on how a balkanized Iran would be no bad thing. Maybe we should break it up into smaller chunks and it would be more manageable that way. So yeah, I don't think the threat's gone anywhere, but at the same time, I do think there are significant restrictions on it coming to pass.
We're going to wrap up this part of the discussion shortly. Can you say a little bit about your upcoming publications that you might have on Iran and also some of the work that you've done on Decline and Fall and on your Substack, how people can access these and what sort of programs you've been putting on about this recently so they can find out more about what's going on?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, I would urge, although I would say this, wouldn't I? I would urge people to check out my podcast with Alexander Mackay, my friend and confederate. It's called Decline and Fall. You can find us on YouTube. We're not so suppressed you can't find us via organic search. And like we do regular broadcasts on topics, but both of kind of contemporary interest, but also just kind of wider discussions about historical issues and their relevance today. And yeah, you can find us there. We have a hour-long special on the failure of the attempted color revolution in Iran, which you may enjoy. I would also, as well, I would urge you to. There are two pieces that I wrote for the Grey Zone in 2024. Which oh no, sorry, one was in September. So one was in September 24, and the other was in July 2025. Now, the first was we reported on leaked documents which showed that Carl Gershman, who's the kind of longtime head of the National Endowment for Democracy, that he's now been kind of farmed out, put out to pasture for Freedom House. And he wanted to create this Iran Freedom Coalition and was secretly lobbying lawmakers to be given a huge chunk of money for the purpose. And I thought it was just it was kind of I mean, disturbing that this was being done at all, and it's very very clear that the effort was regime change, but it was also had this kind of comedic aspect to it because the people that Gershwin was putting forward for his Freedom Coalition, there were people like Bill Kristol, and just like just dreadful individuals with like yeah, to the extent that it featured Iranians at all, it was like universally Iranian diaspora who like openly call for like the bombing and assassination of their of the country's leaders, and all sorts of other things which don't really endear them to domestic audiences. And like that genuinely Gershman thought that this would be a goer that people would embrace. I mean, like, see, someone like Bill Kristol, I mean, who is just this nauseating kind of like notorious neocon who was, at the forefront of tub thumping for war with Iraq and U.S. interventions elsewhere. And it's like, I mean, he's going to be put forward as the savior of the Iranian people. This guy who claimed that the millions killed in the Iraq war were worth it because it was a war of liberation. So I think that speaks to the kind of lack of imagination that Western elites have, and their kind of their ignorance of Iran. But the other piece I'd like to mention was it was published in July last year. My How Time Flies. And it was all about how the MI6 were responsible for cooking up the Iran has nukes lie and circulating it internationally. At a time, I mean, this was at a time when British officials were publicly rather concerned that Obama might, warm relations with Iran, which actually did happen, briefly. Like simultaneously, you have MI6 black, from dark arts specialists cooking up fake intelligence about Iran's supposed nuclear objectives and program, which doesn't exist. Although I think will probably, the Iranians seem to be moving towards acquiring nuclear weapons because they understand that the knives are out for them, and the one way of preventing this from happening, a la North Korea, is to become or indeed Israel itself is to become nuclear capable. So I think that I mean that's quite an interesting example of how I think that a through line through my work is how sometimes the tail wags the dog in respect of the US and British relationship, and frequently MI6 is involved in operations to manipulate the US policymakers into pursuing their agenda. Which a lot of people really struggle to understand, but I think that it's all there in my investigation. How there was this senior MI6 official who at right around the time that governments were around the world were like sanctioning Iran, and there was this kind of fervor in the media about Iran acquiring nukes. There was this veteran MI6 propagandist who's like involved in running MI6's Iran desk and coordinating with quote unquote allies in the Middle East and North America, which means the US and Israel. It's a very interesting demonstration of a phenomenon that I think I try and nail in my work sometimes, but maybe not. I'm not always successful at doing. But I think that those are certainly of interest. Do check out. I've written about Israel's social media efforts to promote the Shah of Iran falsely as a leader in waiting. And I've also just more generally written about it must never be forgotten. As frightening and depressing as many of these developments are. In West Asia, it must never be forgotten that the US was defeated twice in the span of a year by Yemen's Ansarallah. Like both times, we were told that there was this grand, Anglo-American naval flotilla was going to the Red Sea to crush the dastardly Houthis. And both times the US ran away with its tail between its legs. And I might add as well, an amusing excerpt that I never get tired of reiterating. Is that in the wake of Operation Prosperity Guardian, which was the bombastic name given to the Biden administration's first foray into the Red Sea, when the US retreated from the region, there was an Associated Press report which interviewed sailors and pilots who'd been involved in this, and they were talking about how traumatizing it was because they weren't used to getting shot at. Which should tell you something about what shape the empire's military machine is in. Like there's clearly there's a massive disconnect between perception and reality in terms of capability now. And I don't think the US has the practical means of staging anything like they did in the early 2000s with the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq. Like that won't happen. It can't happen anymore. So while the U.S. empire might not be fully dead, and empires never go out quietly or polite, or particularly politely. I do think there is cause for some optimism. And one might draw some from the fact that the US currently isn't at war with Iran when it easily could have been.
Thank you, Kit. After a few short announcements, we'll have questions and comments from participants. To ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button, raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're going to ask everyone to keep your question short, ask one question at a time to allow everyone to participate. And keep in mind that this is a comradely forum for political discussion. Please show respect to other participants and the moderator of today's session. For upcoming programs next week on January 25th, 2026 at 10:30 a.m., we're going to have the speaker, Dan Kovalik, international human rights attorney and labor attorney, who will be speaking on the geopolitical shift in U.S. imperialism under the Trump administration. So should be a very interesting and informative program. If you want to receive notifications for future programs, go to our website at icssmarks.org and sign up for email notifications. We'll send them to you every week. You can find out what's happening. And also, if you can, please drop us a donation through our website. So with that, we're going to shift over to uh, getting questions and answers from the audience. So let's start off with Raj, please, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Okay, Kit, thanks for your presentation and addressing the issue raised by Alan. Um, my observation is that there was some problem with their currency. I mean, this is my understanding. The drop in value of currency that triggered the initial um, protest by shopkeepers. And then all of a sudden, this prepared by external forces, particularly Israeli and US, they kind of got the whole group of people coming out with weapons and so forth and create a lot of violent clashes with the police. A substantial number of police officers were killed, besieged militia and police officers. So my question to you is, what do you know about that, and how far did it up the ladder of leadership did this thing go? Because somebody told me two very high ranking members of the political establishment have been arrested or put under house arrest. What do you know about any of that? So thank you very much, Kit. I'm glad you came to present this today. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you very much for your kind words, Raj. Yeah, I mean, in terms of yes, unrest by shopkeepers due to economic issues. That seems to be like an ongoing kind of phenomenon that hasn't really escalated into anything like the scale of the unrest that we saw, or even determined protests. The fact is that Iran is under has been under crippling sanctions for a very long time. And the explicit purpose is to immiserate the local population and turn them against the government. And this was very depressingly effective in Syria. But I mean, I've not. I think that may well have been a spark that led to kind of gave an encouraging green light to Mossad assets and other foreign assets in the country, and they may have actually overestimated the extent to which this is an issue because I mean Iran does have ways of getting around sanctions. It has it does have it has a very close economic relationship with Russia and China, which is explicitly anti-sanction in nature, and also just more generally they have moved towards domestic production as has Venezuela, which I think is a very important thing for countries to do in areas of energy and food consumption. I mean, like countries need to be not dependent on others for these basic essentials of living and human dignity. There have been reports, as you mentioned, of senior Iranian officials being fired or arrested, etc. I mean, the again, I think a lot of this is very questionable. I think that Khamenei, I think that he's actually taken quite an almost conciliatory tone. I mean, on top of condemning very clear foreign involvement in this. He has, as far as I'm aware, he hasn't to date suggested that internal elements were involved. And I mean, he is, if that were the case, he would obviously be, very keen to promote this. And they would be trotted out in public. So I mean I think that we need to be very careful about the kind of news that's emanating from Iran. I might add as well that it's been I mentioned drop site they have despite the fact that they're supposedly this kind of anti-establishment outlet, they recently posted this false translation of something Khomeini said, where Khomeini was talking about how many innocent civilians and state officials had been killed by violent protesters. They posted a mistranslation of his statements in which it made it seem like Khomeini was boasting about how many people that local authorities had killed. So I think we need to be extremely cautious about any and all information emanating from the country at the moment. I actually, it must be borne in mind that we have heard for weeks about on social media at least, various clashes or city takeovers, in Iran by opposition elements. I think that the experience of people in the country is very, very different. And we shouldn't overestimate the significance of what appears like a large crowd on Twitter, say. It might just be it could be nothing. It could be an AI generated image. It could be your old footage. It might not be particularly representative of what's happening on the ground. And I made this point in our Decline and Fall podcast on the unrest in Iran that I myself was kind of experienced this at the very end of 2023 when in Serbia there were these very low level kind of a few hundred people were protesting in the wake of an election, and this was framed on social media and also by elements of the Western media as a dawning revolution in Serbia. And actually, it was just a tiny crowd, which the overwhelming majority of residents of the capital, Belgrade, had no idea were protesting. They were just kind of going about their business with kind of unmolested and unaware that this supposed revolution was unfolding. And then, of course, it just led to nothing, and it was forgotten about very promptly. So yeah, to invert what Gil Scott Heron said. Sadly, the revolution is often televised, and it is frequently fiction.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Gene, followed by Citizen One. So, Gene, please go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kit. This was great. And I have to confess, I have a lot of problems keeping up with the latest news from the Middle East. So sometimes I go back in history, and I think about fellow Mohammad Mossadegh, who was Prime Minister of Iraq in 1953, and he was overthrown by a coalition of the CIA and MI6 to regain that. And he was imprisoned, I believe, and eventually died there. But I'm just wondering, does he still have an impact or any kind of feeling by the Iranian people? Do they remember him as one of the great people who stood up to the CIA, basically? So that's my question.
Well, I mean, very sadly, I think that there's actually very little pro Mossadegh sentiment left, and I think it's because you must bear in mind that while he was the elected leader of Iran, he sought to limit the influence of mullahs and religious figures in the country. The British actually exploited some kind of religious hardliners to get rid of him. So yeah, very sadly, I think that his legacy is rather forgotten today in modern Iran. It must be stressed as well that that is a real tragedy, not just because he was an anti-imperialist figure, not only because he dared, defy the British and, nationalized Iran's oil reserves when British Petroleum was raping and pillaging the country and, impoverishing the local population. It's just more generally is like he saw a stable, secular country that was it wasn't intended to be an irritant to Europe or North America, but he saw a kind of equal place at the table because Iran is it is a historic country with an extremely rich culture, and yes, enormous amounts of influence, within and without West Asia. It should be. I think it was Richard Helms, who was the former CIA director, who then became the ambassador to Iran in the late 70s, just before the revolution. He said that in geopolitical terms, Iran is the center of the world. There's no need for it to be an impoverished backwater, as the US is concertedly attempting to make it. It should be treated with respect, and their national pride should be comprehended as legitimate. So it's like I think there's very little trace of his legacy, as it were, in the country today. One thing I'm always keen to tell American audience or remind American audiences is that when Mossadegh toured the US while he was at war with MI6 and the British and BP, and he framed his crusade in the same terms as the revolution of 1776. And his political, media, and public audiences were highly receptive to this. he was cheered and got, glowing headlines for what he was saying. I think that Americans could do with, recalling that particular aspect of their history.
Yeah, this is still one of the CIA's greatest hits.
Okay, next is Citizen One, followed by Peter. So, Citizen One, please unmute. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. So I checked out your YouTube channel, Decline and Fall, and I've already subscribed to it. And I just want to let everyone know that one of the podcasts that I'm going to look very much forward to is Noam Chomsky, the elite's pet dissident. So many people will know that I've long had criticism of Noam Chomsky, someone who still supports the U.S. government's version of the JFK assassination. And I've often criticized him as a left Zionist. The other thing is that I feel that we know that the U.S. doesn't actually care if not only, but especially a non-European government is a democracy or not, as long as that government will do what the U.S. says. And we can look and see what's going on in Minnesota today. And we can, with what federal agents are doing already, we can imagine what would happen if Minnesota protesters started mass murdering police and federal agents, or if they started burning down buildings. The U.S. would shut down the internet in Minnesota and all the cell towers, and certainly not let foreign intelligence agents coordinate attacks in Minnesota or anywhere else in the U.S. So we see that Trump has tacoed out once again. Trump and his, the Zionist-sponsored protesters in the Middle East and the U.S.-sponsored protesters, he's left them hanging out to dry. And I feel that Trump actually respects leaders who stand up to him, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. When's the last time you've ever heard of a small country threatening to bury the U.S. in a lake of fire? So, Trump, who said he was going to sail his mighty nuclear submarine fleet to North Korea, turned him around. So my question, one rhetorical and one directly for you, is that, I wondered what the kidnapping of Maduro would do elsewhere in the world. And I didn't know, but I wondered how China might respond with regard to Taiwan. I wondered how Russia might further respond. And I also wondered whether it would put Iran on a hair trigger. And indeed, Iran said, as many of you know, that Iran would not wait for a first strike, that if Iran felt that if imminent forces were massing against it, that Iran would strike first. And of course, anybody who knows about the
2 minutes.
Oh, thank you. I'll wrap up. Knows about all those exposed U.S. bases. My question is, we heard that Arab states and Israel told Trump not to attack. My reading between the lines says that Israel got its ass kicked the first time and wasn't going to risk it again. But I'd like your opinion on why Israel in particular, according to reports, along with Arab states, urged Trump not to attack Iran. Thank you.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's certainly very interesting that it appears that Saudi Arabia is finally actually taking a firm line, and yes, explicitly lobbied Trump not to do this. Bearing in mind that the Saudis opened their airspace so Israel could attack or attempt to attack Iran, the first time round. I think it's a recognition of the fact that there is widespread understanding that the balance of power in the region has shifted. I'm not so. Perhaps Israel was hoping that Trump would go ahead and do it, and then when he appeared to get cold feet, they wanted to, appear to have taken, a less hawkish line on this. Preempting Trump's climb down. But I don't think that was at all driven by a realistic assessment of the facts on the ground, or the fact that Israel would be in real trouble if they went for this again. Because I mean, despite all of the warnings from think tanks, and despite all the admissions that by these senior Israeli military officials that they burned through most of their interceptors within 4 or 5 days, and were effectively a sitting duck subsequent to this. I mean, the Israeli leadership is completely off leash at the moment. And there is open talk in the Israeli media of creating Greater Israel, of how Jews are biblically obligated to conquer parts of Lebanon. That and the Syrian puppet government installed by the CIA and MI6 has effectively ceded the entire Golan Heights to Israel. So I mean, they still have this sense that they're winning. Even if they're in very serious trouble. They have unconditional US financial support, which is propping up their economy, which is in complete tatters, and they just keep going. I mean, like, it was very, very clear that Israel was Israel's economy was in trouble, but after 2 months of the genocide in Gaza, in December 2023, there were Israeli economists saying, we're in extremely hot water here. But that hasn't deterred Netanyahu from pursuing further belligerent action, starting multi-front wars, etc. Because they know that when push comes to shove, the US will always support them. I mean, the US's ability to do so is actually very foreshortened, at this stage. But the cash keeps rolling in, the bunker busters keep rolling in. They do have a sense of invincibility, and of course, there's the Samson option where if they feel threatened, they might use nukes. So I mean, yeah, I would not attach much credibility to the notion that the Israelis knew that they were worried about this and wanted to step back. Because all of their actions and the statements of their leaders, I mean, they've openly stated that they consider crushing the resistance their key objective. And recently they recognized Somaliland, this breakaway Somali territory, very controversial move, which even Britain, which effectively runs Somaliland as a colony, and that's something I've written about, that condemned in the strongest possible terms. So I mean, yeah, their foray into Somaliland was explicitly conducted on the basis that, well, this will mean that we can strike Yemen in a future war. So they still have this kind of endless war appetite, even if they might not have the clout to actually do it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to say briefly, I've mentioned this in this forum before, that going back to 2003 or 2006, at least 2 decades, there's always been talk this week for sure on the left. The U.S. is going to attack Iran, aside from that token little attack that they had. But I said the U.S. was not going to war against Iran. Iran is too formidable. It will raise the political cost. No, it can't defeat the U.S., but it can certainly raise the political cost, just like Vietnam did. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan stepped away, so I'm going
No,
to
Peter.
Peter, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Okay, you're
Peter.
back.
I got dropped. Peter, if you would go ahead, and then followed by Janet.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Kit, thanks very much. This is a great topic, and I really enjoy hearing your analysis, which, to be realistic, we don't get really good international geostrategic analysis from leftists almost never. I mean, it's I troll the different leftist entities around the US, the DSA, the Trotskyist websites, and almost entirely they're promoting this support of the protests, so-called protests in Iran. So it's nice to have a different perspective on this. But what I'm really interested in is this, clearly Iran can sustain a resistance against Israel and U.S. and possibly level the playing field, if not win against Israel if they have to, unless it leads up to nuclear weapons. But certainly they have a serious military strategy that can defend themselves very well. Yet at the same time, looking in the broader world, global competition, they cannot enforce their will in Venezuela, where apparently they've just gotten cut off. They've had, really large investments in Venezuela. I think they have somewhere around $6 billion invested. They had a refinery that they built. I'm assuming they're going to lose everything. And as will Russia and China, is my guess. So there are always limits, even if you have a good military, there are still limits on what can be, how broadly you can project your economic and political influence around the world, and how much the particularly America can cut you off at the knees. So I understand. It's not like the BRICS doesn't matter. It certainly does matter, and SCO and these other international organizations. But you mentioned Korea has nuclear weapons, therefore they've never been touched. But even with nuclear weapons, there is still, you are really kind of bound by all kinds of other limitations, and you are exposed, economically and politically by your borders with other nations. So, I guess my question is it really as simple as, just having some really great hypersonic missiles, or is there a lot more to survival than simply that in the current global hegemonic competition?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a help, having that capability. But I do think, this is a point that I've made several times. It does bear repeating. I think that the BRICS is a challenge in some ways to American power, but primarily that's economic for the time being. There's not been an emergence of a unified military counterweight to the US or its allies. We've not seen anything like that at all. And I think that there is a widespread call it assumption or hope that Russia and China will come to the rescue. Sadly, for people who are possessed of such beliefs, we've kind of had several demonstrations that they're not coming to the rescue. I mean, and this happened with Syria, where the government of Assad fell. And it was pretty rapidly recognized by China. And Russia has since the Putin has met personally with Jelani, and they've made an agreement that Russia can keep its bases in the country. And so it's like it's very important to build up international coalitions and in every sphere. But when it comes down to it, you cannot depend on BRICS or any of the other kind of emerging alternative political, military, or economic unions to rescue you. And I mean, again, Venezuela is kind of a sad example of that. And it does seem that the Chinese and the Russians were in the loop on what was going to happen. The Chinese were in the country at the time that he was snatched. Delci was very quickly, on the phone with Putin, and I don't think that the discussion was, where were you? The discussion was, we knew this was going to happen, and there was nothing we could really do to stop it. So yeah, I mean, like I say, on top of building international alliances, I think countries really need to be focused on their own defense. And whether that's building up their own militaries, and yes, also as well, becoming independent and kind of sovereign in the fields of food production, because that is at the basically at the touch of a button the US can cut countries off from all sorts of things, ranging from like toilet paper to sweet corn. So it's like yeah, it's a balancing act, but I do think, I mean, if there is a silver lining here, I do think that a lot more, many more countries are now on guard. I mean, we're seeing Trump openly talk about seizing Greenland, and there's all sorts of kind of fulmination from European vassals about how awful this would be, but like ultimately, it's quite clearly understood in Brussels and Berlin and Paris and other European capitals that if the US really wanted to do this, there's not really much they can do about it. So and you look at other areas as well. It's like, I mean, we, as I've discussed, Iran basically neutered the protests by shutting off the country's internet and its internal and external communications. There was a coup in Nepal, which I believe we discussed the last time I appeared on this program. That was triggered by Nepal seeking to create its own internet ecosystem and infrastructure, and blocking, kind of much like China, like blocking Western sites. That was a key trigger for the color revolution that exploded in September last year in Nepal, which should tell you how sensitively that is viewed in Washington. Like they don't, the US does not want countries to have independence in any sphere, but particularly say like technology, where the US is very dominant, and most major tech firms in the world are American. With the Chinese slowly but surely edging in, but I mean they don't have there's not a regular there's not a Chinese alternative to Google which is regularly used throughout the world. So it that yeah, I think aiming for national sovereignty and national independence in key areas is really the way forward for the time being. But yeah, we certainly can't count on BRICS, as a savior, because it's still in it's still its kind of embryonic phases of in terms of constructing alternative payment systems, etc., which is a fairly basic thing. And I mean, to just to round this out with relation to to Iran. Yeah, they have strong in international alliances and relationships, but I think that they understand that they are on their own here, if it really comes to it, and that has probably heightened their level of vigilance. And this is a message which is cut through across society. But the people are taking matters into their own hands and preparing for that they are vigilant and ready for if in the event that war comes.
Okay, we're getting close to the end time, so I'm only going to be able to take a few more questions. So Janet, please go ahead. Let's keep questions one at a time and keep it to 2 minutes. So go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Kit, for joining us and for all your work. Trump's implementation of the UN Security Council sellout resolution 2803 is back in the news, with his Board of Peace now once again including Tony Blair and Marco Rubio, and of course no Palestinian representation. When asked what its objective would be, Trump told Reuters, quote, "It's going to, in my opinion, start with Gaza and then do conflicts as they arise, like other countries that are going to war with each other," end quote. The title of that article is Leaders Receive U.S. Invite for Board of Peace to Go Beyond Gaza Conflict. Leaders from several other countries yesterday received a letter inviting them to join the Board of Peace initiative that would initially aim to end conflict in Gaza, but then be expanded to tackle conflicts elsewhere. I'll post a link to the article in the chat. And per Palestine Network News, Channel 12 reports an American official saying, let Netanyahu focus on Iran and leave Gaza to us. I'd appreciate your comments on this. But one other thing. Speaking of Venezuela earlier, would you also comment on the long-standing Venezuela-Iran relationship that I believe began with Chavez and Ahmadinejad?
Ahmadinejad.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, yeah, like I say, Venezuela and Iran, like they have been bolstering their military and economic cooperation for a very long time. And it's like, I mean, bearing in mind that both of these countries, they don't have blue water navies. They ran a joint naval exercise, I believe it was about 10 years ago, and this got all of the neocons in the Western media shrieking and hollering about what a terrible threat to Western civilization they posed, with their kind of token assortment of boats, doing maneuvers together. But yeah, that the Washington Post ran a piece on how there was an emerging quote unquote axis of evasion, which is rather stultifying phraseology. But what they meant was that there is this growing alliance of countries which are kind of bonded together by token of the fact that they're heavily sanctioned and they are Western designated, enemies numero uno. The US has sanctioned so much of the world that it's kind of forced these countries together. And we see this with Russia and China, where for a very long time, Russia and China had kind of relatively warm but not particularly close relations. Russia being the world's biggest energy exporter and China being the world's biggest energy importer. They didn't even have a dedicated deal on energy until I think it was 2014. But then yet, by the token of all of the Western sanctions on Russia, the bells at the wedding of China and Russia were duly rung by Western powers, and this forced them together to the point that they're conjoined at the hip now. And they are trying to carve out a new world, but I mean it's still very much in its infancy. And I mean, on the Iranian point, I think it's very important to note that there are people, including people within Iran itself, who think that the Iranian government has not been doing enough for the Palestinians or to defend itself or to assert its interests. But I mean, the Iranian analysts I know who are of that particular disposition, they're very quick to note, well, hey, look, Iran is one country which, yes, is heavily sanctioned, which is up against the US global empire and all of its vassals, whether that's in Europe, but also within the West Asia region. Iran's not going to be able to take on effectively the entire empire, which war with Israel, would amount to. It can't do that on its own, or indeed, overnight. Shifting the balance of power does take time. I think that to a large extent, what is regarded as inaction by the Iranians is actually just waiting and seeing and taking notes, all along. There's a great quote from the Taliban, which is, you have watches, we have time. Which is it's saying I'm rather fond of. But yeah, I mean, the Global Peace Initiative that you mentioned, I mean, I gather that there's some chatter about how countries are being charged $1 billion to join. I mean, that seems it just seems, it seems very, very, very weird. And like people like Tony, vampires like Tony Blair have been appointed to it. So I mean, I'm not sure really what to make of it. I mean, it does seem like yet another opportunity for Trump to put his name, plaster his name and face on something and claim that it's authoritative, like his call to create this vast new naval fleet, which is which has specifically got his face on the side of ships and stuff. It's of course branded as attempting to resolve conflicts globally, but I don't really think it could amount to very much. I think that it's also yes, probably a way of disentangling the US from the UN, because in such as the ironies of history, the UN was for a very long time a US puppet, which voted however the US wanted it to vote, and people who didn't vote the right way were severely punished, like when Yemen didn't vote in favor of the Gulf War in 1991. But now it's gotten to the point where Russia and China aren't kind of basket cases, and they are assertive on the world stage and are willing to veto things. Now that they've got a bit of power behind them, the US wants out of the United Nations, and this is potentially an alternative mechanism. I mean, whether it will catch on or whether it will last beyond Trump's last term in office, if he does indeed leave at the end of his mandated 4 years, very much remains to be seen. It just strikes me as a kind of publicity stunt for the time being.
Okay, again, we're getting very close to the end here, so please keep questions short. Jim, let's go ahead, unmute and ask your question, followed by Judith, and we'll try to get Richard right in if we have time. So Jim, please go ahead.
Yeah. So back in '64, I was on the Bonhomme Richard, and just before the Tonkin Gulf incident, to give you an idea of the time, we docked in Yemen, and there wasn't enough time to go up to Iran. So the Shah flew aboard. I have to say I got too close to him, and I'd never been in the presence of someone so evil. One of the questions I always had was, what happened to Bani Sadr? I heard about Bani Sadr as sort of a democratic socialist, a social democrat alternative to the Ayatollahs in Paris, and apparently what I read, he came close. But of course that didn't happen. Also, I just read in October '73, when Israel faced certain defeat, Nixon had promised no support. Israel was misbehaving on a grand scale. Instead of fighting harder, they do something no ally had ever done. They roll nuclear missiles out of desert caves, make absolutely certain our satellites can see them, and send us a message. Give us everything we need, or we start a nuclear holocaust. Within hours, Nixon authorizes the largest emergency weapons airlift in history, not out of friendship. Is there any truth to that?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the particular figures you're talking about. So I don't think I can comment.
I mean, I've seen more and more references to the fact that Israel has threatened Americans using nuclear weapons. That it's a lot worse than I imagined. But I'll keep looking for more evidence of that. How about Bani Sadr?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not familiar. But I mean, okay. Ari, the threats. I mean, at one of Netanyahu's recent, addresses to U.S. lawmakers, where there was another record set for standing ovations while he gave his terrible address. He specifically stated, every single one of you has a bit of Israel in your pocket, referring to your smartphone, with obvious connotations with the mass explosion of pages in Lebanon. And I think, I forget who it was, but there was another US, I think it was a US senator, who was talking about how that when he first got elected, he went to a donors meeting where every lawmaker was given a QR code, kind of a badge with a QR code on it. And they walked around talking to different Zionist lobby groups. And if the Zionist lobby group liked them, they would, tap their phone on the on their badge, and they would be gifted money. So I think the Israeli influence in US politics has never been more open or more blatant. And I mean, this is not it's become considerably more intensified under Trump, but I mean, it was very much the case under Biden as well, where I mean, just consistently Democrats voted in favor of resolutions, or in favor of motions granting Israel all of the equipment it needed to carry out a 21st century Holocaust in Gaza, and there was complete duopoly unanimity on this question. Even lawmakers like AOC, who her supporters boast doesn't directly take Israeli lobby funding, voted in favor of all of this stuff. So I mean, again, I think similar with the British. I think that the tail is very much wagging the dog in the Israel-US relationship, but with a greater intensity than any other ally, quote unquote, of the US.
Okay, last couple of questions. Judith, one question. Please keep it short. We're over time. Go ahead, Judith, unmute. Judith? Okay, let's go to Richard Wright. Richard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Originally, I wanted
I
to add,
unmuted, by the way.
Okay.
I'll defer to her.
Hello. All right, Judith, please go ahead and make it
Okay,
short.
all right. I'll try to be quick. Okay, so you already discussed why we should not depend on Russia and China to be the saviors of humanity at this particular time, at any rate. But I'm interested in why a tanker coming from Iran with a crew of Ukrainians, Russians, and Indians, the Bella One, was chased all over the Atlantic and finally apprehended north of Scotland, and this, despite the fact that Russia had flagged it, had given it its flag, and a Russian warship and submarine were supposedly protecting this ship, which was renamed the Marinera. And so is Russia a paper bear when it comes to America? What? Why did they? And I believe this ship had something to do with Iran. It came from Iran or whatever, and it was empty. It had no oil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that again, it strikes me as it struck me as a kind of publicity stunt, because Trump's been talking a lot about tightening sanctions on Russia to try and force them to seek a peace deal. Although there's not really much more that can be sanctioned, and the sanctions have not had the effect that we were told they would. The ruble's not been made rubble. In fact, actually, many areas of Russian industry have been revitalized by the withdrawal of Western companies, who've also been charged significant sums for extricating themselves from Russia. But yeah, I mean that whole incident. I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of already almost been forgotten. I mean, events move very quickly these days. But I mean, it was a ship that was accused of breaking U.S. sanctions and shipping Iranian oil, and it has historically transported Venezuelan crude, around the world, evading sanctions, etc. And yeah, I mean, I think that this was, flexing muscles and trying to show that the US is serious. But I mean, irony of ironies, as you mentioned, it was completely empty. And I think that the Russians have shown like a very high level of tolerance for absolutely flagrant escalations, and red line breaches. Yeah, red line breaches, but their patience may be wearing thin, and we have reached a point where, like, Russia is explicitly stating, in response to incidents like this, that you are risking a war, and we will not be as gentle as we've been in Ukraine. And also, when the Ukraine carries out, like, attacks on Putin's residence with drones, clearly with the assistance of the CIA, Russian officials are very quick to say, "Well, you've just pushed us up the escalation ladder," and then they respond in kind.
Do you think that could have been a threat to butt out of Venezuela, since it happened right before?
Quite possibly, yeah. Quite possibly, it could have been. It could have been a message. But I mean, like I say, I mean, I'm not really. There's the condemnations that you might expect from China and Russia in response to Maduro's abduction have not really been forthcoming. And I think that might point to a certain degree of coordination. There was a firefight prior to Maduro's capture, it seems, but there was clearly a military stand down order, and air defenses weren't intercepting the helicopters that flew very low over Caracas, which could have been shot down with small arms, because they were kissing the ground. So yeah, I mean, quite possibly a message in a bottle, as it were.
All right.
Thank you.
Want to thank you, Kit, for coming back and speaking to us. A great
My
program
pleasure.
today. Everybody should look for his website at kitklarenberg.com and subscribe to his Substack to get more good information and Decline and Fall. We want to remind everyone that you can sign up for email notifications for our future programs at icssmarks.org. You can also find video recordings of our past programs. Contact us with feedback and suggestions for future programs, and make a donation to support our Sunday morning program. So next week will be Dan Kovalik. Please come back, and hopefully we'll have Kit back again to hear from you again. We always really enjoy your benefit from your appearances. So thank you very much, Kit.
God bless you. My pleasure. Take care.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.